everybody is doing well. Well, it's been a while. I have been making videos about news, updates, everything that's going on, especially here locally. I've been quite busy with the Nevada legislature testifying, especially against many of these horrible bills that are very one-sided for special interests. I'm actually planning to go to Carson City in the next several hours, believe it or not. However, before I go, I wanted to talk about some of the news updates that's going on. I know some of these articles are not that new, but I want to just talk about to the heart of really what's going on. I know there's a lot of discussions about the Pope, the tariffs, the immigration, especially in a more national or in a global level, but I really want to talk about state and local issues. So let's start talking about fuel prices. As you know, first of all, there is a bill called AB 530, which would extend the current existing gas tax for Clark County, but it will also take away the vote away from the people. Some testimonies about it. However, that's not the heart of why gas prices here in Las Vegas are obviously spiking up or above the national average. You can see in this article, California, Arizona, Nevada gas prices continue to spike as they did about 2 months ago after investigators blocked refinery repairs. California gas prices have risen about 40 cents from the Martinez refinery that produces 10% of the state. Okay, and you can see it affects Washoe County, that's Reno. In Maricopa County, which is required to use California's anti-smog gas prices are $3.65, while the state average is $3.42. And that is true, actually. That's why I got a lot of gas when I was visiting Tucson last month. You can see here they have all these governing resupply requirements, all of these different factors. A summer blend that takes place in March and April, which is kind of very interesting to know how gas prices, especially Chevron and Shell in stations here in Las Vegas, have barely changed, even though the price of oil has come down a lot. I believe the barrel of oil is now at like $59. That's when you look at Brent crude, not necessarily WTI crude. The governors of Nevada and Arizona sent a bipartisan letter warning Nevada legislators and governors about adopting the refinery regulations, saying these minimum inventory requirements reduce the availability of fuel and increase prices. You can see here from Governor Katie Hobbs and Governor Joe Lombardo. Now, I do believe eventually what's going to happen is, now this leads me to this article, because California is losing a refinery, the feds are going to have to get involved. Because I really don't think that they're just going to allow some states to have gas at $2 to $2.50 a gallon, and then here gas is going to be like $5 and California is going to be $7. I can't really see that. It's just going to be so obvious and insane. Something's going to happen. I think what may happen is the feds are probably going to get involved, remove those standards. California is probably going to get audited about the gas taxes, the cap and trade, and everything. And this problem will have to restore to what it was in the 1990s. Because remember, this all started in 1999 when California adopted the summer blend policy that was enacted by Gray Davis. And yes, it is standards, it is taxes, but I do believe behind the scenes, oil refineries do gouge prices. Because remember, in March of 2022, as I showed you before, when Putin invaded Ukraine, this part of the country went up $1.50, while the states east of the Rocky Mountains went up about 70 cents. We can see that there is some gouging going on. However, we do believe the standards not only increases prices, but create an environment for gouging to continue. With Valero announcing the pending closures of 2 California refineries, the state will lose at least 18% of its current refining capacity by the end of 2026. California is an energy island, meeting the demands of Nevada and Arizona, rely on refineries who require costly imports. And I think, by the way, Lombardo, who is very likely going to win for re-election, by the way, is going to have to address this issue. So yeah, Newsom is right. There is price gouging. However, again, his policies encourage this to happen. Okay, so it's really both. But this is what these cowards do. They blame something that's 40% of the problem while trying to hide the other 60%. And it works the other way around as well. These new regulations empower the state to determine where new refineries is allowed to shut down for maintenance and set aside for storage requirements that require refineries to build vast storage to smooth out shortages. The state's ban of new gas-powered cars in 2035, new refineries are not being built, leaving remaining refineries at 100% capacity at all times. As a result, outages in single refinery result in spike in gas prices. You see, and I think there is kind of a point, because I noticed at Chevron, they charge a lot more, sometimes $1 more than a gas station across the street. Which makes you think that the oil refineries may lobby for these policies, environmental, gas taxes, and so forth. You never know. So I told you about how the two governors, this one in Arizona, basically sent a letter. Newsom's director of Division Petroleum Market Outside about the California Energy Commission has said that because California is a profitable area to run a refinery, that these regulations have very little impact. Marine traffic and capacity face significant limitations, which will encounter more in the future due to the Jones Act tonnage available. In March, they're going to close a refinery in LA, which refines 140,000 barrels a day, close to 9% of its refinery capacity. Okay. The Benicia refinery is almost 150,000 refineries, 9% of the total. So you can see here that it will lose close to 300,000 barrels a day, close to 20% of the refinery capacity. Let's just go right here. Washington's excess supply allows it to supply Oregon, which has no refineries, but because it only refines a total of 246,000 barrels a day, it cannot meet California's growing shortfall. See, and that's why many argue here in Nevada and Arizona we can just get more gas from New Mexico and Texas. Of course, that is not all that easy. In fact, I really do believe that Nevada could just build its own refinery. California is the most heavily regulated state. It's more expensive than Hawaii. Yeah, well, unfortunately, we're in Las Vegas. We're going to have to get these impacts. And by the way, this doesn't just impact consumers, residents. It impacts all sorts of people, tourists, businesses, and so forth. Unbelievable. And of course, where's the Nevada legislature talking about this? Oh, wait. They're busy right now focusing on movie studio bills, which they're going to have a hearing only in about a few hours. And what do you know? Corrupt politicians, establishments, which I've exposed, showed you in my YouTube videos in person, Sandra Wardigui and Danielle Moreno. And not to mention another person who's pumping this up, Senator Lange, of course, Roberta Lange. They're just so corrupt. They're so establishment. They're so much part of the elites. They don't care about you. They're essentially shills for their donors. Wake up. Look at their donor money. And they're going to make all these promises just like the stadium. And then everybody else will have to end up paying the costs. And of course, they say, oh yeah, it has to abide by regulations. I don't even believe they're going to abide by it. Don't believe what these people tell you. Just like all of the promises they gave about COVID and all their other bills. Remember, Sandra Wardigui is the one who's behind all the gun bills. Now, I will give her credit for some of the good bills she's done, encouraging more federal lands to be released. I don't think that's going to solve the entirety of the housing problem. But nevertheless, oh yes, it's an expand the economy, bring new jobs and industry. This industry is going to exist. Yeah, right. And we've seen that happen in other states, all these tax breaks. And then it comes to fruition. What happened to Faraday? What happened to Tesla? Remember years ago? Whatever happened? This is the thing. And by the way, there's bipartisan opposition, and there's going to be people from both parties very likely they're going to vote for this bill. And I'm not surprised if Lombardo, if this bill passes, is not going to veto it. Because again, it seems they're all part of the establishment. Now maybe this one, Liberta Land, just says union built and operated. I guess you can say it's the lesser of the evils. Then again, though, you can't trust these politicians. Not to mention when they say, oh, we need money for schools. Well, this bill will debunk this idea. Not to mention these people, which, by the way, many of these NGOs who are these pro-open borders crowd, as you can see here, they're going to say that these mass deportations are going to create a catastrophic fallout. Now, remember, folks, the main problem, it's not these migrants, it's these NGOs. It is these politicians, it's these corporations that are hiring them. And they're there to help the elites of what George Carlin says, the owners of this country. It's there to essentially push a political agenda. I know this article is more than 2 months old, but I want to address this. So you can see here is that ICE is going to do a lot of mass deportations. Again, deportations can help, but the heart of the problem is you have to end birthright citizenship. You have to audit and fine these employers. You have to go after remittances. So now you have all these NGOs that are crying and are complaining, but let's just see who they are, okay? Understanding where they work, is harder to know. Employers are unlikely to admit that they hire people without improper documentation. University of Reno. But Nevada's workforce has always been transient. Advanced manufacturing tourism has always depended on migratory workforce. These workers can be found in many roles: street vendors, construction workers, teachers, grocers, those who pick the produce in the fields. Erica Marquez. And of course, doctors and nurses and teachers, folks. The teachers and doctors are jobs that American citizens can do. I can give you many examples that even legal immigrants, too many of them can compete against people who were born in the United States, like cab drivers, dealers. The list goes on. Look at this. They're promoting this guy, Jeremy Aguero. I don't trust this guy. Remember his predictions of the 2007 financial crisis? What I can say, the immigrant population is woven every part of our fabric or community. Mass deportations is going to create a domino effect. Now, Secretary Treasurer Susie Martinez of Nevada State AFL-CIO. Now remember, this is everything you need to know. Because when these unions are defending these unauthorized illegal aliens, this explains everything you need to know. And let's not forget, Susie Martinez was a state assembly person. It's a revolving door. These NGOs are promoting these illegal aliens. Of course, she lobbied for illegal aliens getting health insurance. Not to mention the fact that this is why they're here, because the unions, these employers, are all part of it. In fact, I believe that these employers, these NGO leaders, these politicians, they're the ones have to be targeted by ICE. Hospitality, construction, agriculture, well, just find them. Duh. And if they can't do those jobs, then have a guest worker visa. Businesses could struggle and meet the demand-filling position, leading to price increases and slowing the economy. Well, actually, if they leave, then you'll have less housing demand. Not to mention, it could cause, likely it's going to cause wages to go up. Hostile work environment, sending their school because of fear. Well, our schools are over capacity. They're not performing well. They have all these ELL programs, not to mention all the fake identification. It's not as what they tell you to believe. Not to mention, of course, you got to look at the hotels and everything, and that's, again, a totally different story. But it affects all the employers. Nevada workforce is getting tired. There's fewer people available to fill these positions. Well, again, you're supposed to raise wages. Our labor force participation rate for workers who are born in the United States, male 25 to 54-year-olds, or prime working age, is still pretty pathetic compared to decades ago. A lot of them are not working full-time. A lot of them are underemployed. Keep this in mind. More than 1 in 3 migrants are Mexican nationals, the Latino community. I mean, just stop it with this race thing. It's just ridiculous. Federal, state, and local taxes. We hear this over and over and over again. Look, folks, when you look at their public schools, when you look at the benefits that their U.S. citizen children can get, as admitted by Harry Reid in 1993, you will find that, again, it is not a taxpayer benefit. Yeah, and more Americans have to do lower paying work that our immigrants are doing now. Well, again, wages when labor becomes scarce. And when it comes to produce pictures, you can have the Bracero program. We used to do that. It's going to impact the ability to build more homes. Look, it's called encouraging more trade programs. It's called, obviously, training our own people. And what about all the techniques in construction, like I showed you in my earlier YouTube videos? When it comes to 3D printing, when it comes to manufactured processes, different factors. There are many different ways that you can do that. Yeah, property values can lower, and I talked about this. But what's disgusting is a lot of these NGOs, Make the Road, Culinary Union, they're all assisting in these people. And then here is another article, as you can see. They're all going to have economic impact as deportations are going to continue. Okay? Nevada's workforce, and like I said, 1.7 million workers. The local building trade union said, we get tired of it. Look what it's built. Look, folks, who used to do these jobs decades ago? It's unbelievable. There won't be as many as apartment building. Rents will go up. Well, actually, of course, if you remember, our main source of population growth in the United States is immigration. So without immigration, there's a good chance that we'll have negative population growth, which means less demand for homes. Not to mention, this will probably mean home prices will come down. We talked about this earlier. Employers are legally required to verification of immigration status of their workers, but many companies reportedly do not comply with these checks, but they should. Unbelievable. It is just sad, and this could it's going to increase that housing shortage. Okay, it can have some impact, we know that, but again, you can train your own people, you can have visa programs, and you can have alternative motives of construction. Now, speaking of housing, let's take a look at this article. There's a lot of proposals to expand more federal land, and I think I've showed you this before. There's bipartisan, so Masto supports it. A lot of the Democrats in the legislature supports it. We have basically Congress from both parties that support it, as well as the Trump administration. The governor supports it. So we all know that 85% of the land is owned by the federal government, managed by the BLM. We all know that. So they want to release more federal land. Now, I don't think it's going to solve all the affordability problem because, again, yes, if you expand outward, you have more cheap land, and lower prices in land can reduce costs for developers, and that brings savings to the consumer, of course. It all depends on what competition we have, how many companies are there, and also, not everybody wants to live on the outskirts. A lot of people want to live close to work. But I think even if this doesn't do the job, now that excuse essentially gets thrown out of the window, okay? I want federal lands to expand because I'm going to have the ability at ease to build the neighborhoods that I want to build. That's why I moved here to Las Vegas. It's a long story. Honestly, I just don't really see why we have a policy where the federal government has to own so much land. We can just give it to counties, states, and we don't have to have a disposal boundary. But really what disgusts me a lot is that how do we get into this place? Remember, this comes from a 1998 law, the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act. And this was pushed by Harry Reid and the senator at that time, I think his name was Brian or something, both were from Nevada. The thing is that why don't these politicians admit that a lot of the problems we have with these big companies buying up all these homes, the financial crisis, the federal lands, is caused by those politicians? We never really get to the roots of the problem, because if they did, then they would admit that what they supported was wrong. Okay? We have to get this done. We talked about this for several years. Should release at least 2 million acres to a combination of state, local governments, and builders. And they should relinquish control parcels in rural Nevada to spur development there. Absolutely. Okay, now, of course, it depends on how you grow, because I don't want to see this kind of growth. Garages eating up the front, cul-de-sacs, gated neighborhoods, strip malls, arterial roads or stroads, parking requirements, all the codes that enforce this policy, the zoning laws that get all of this. We don't want the same BS. We want change, folks. And let's see if that actually is going to happen. And as a result of this, the result of the lack of labor, the lack of lumber, the result of COVID, the result of the federal lands policy, the result of many builders going bankrupt, supply chain disruptions. I mean, you name it, okay? And by the way, I know this guy, I spoke to this guy, and then I spoke to this woman at the legislative testimony. The thing is, though, as a result, Las Vegas has a housing shortage, okay? And what happens is a housing shortage is that a lot of us suffer. We have to pay more for rent. People struggle. They have to work extra hours. They have to work other jobs. This brings downward pressure on wages. People are less likely to have kids. They go more into debt. They have less disposable income. I mean, there's just so many problems that come as a result when we have housing shortages. Transportation is another cost. That's why my organization, Strong Towns Las Vegas, the local is trying to fight all that. We can see here, and I remember as a kid in the 90s and 2000s, we had a lot more permits. And that permit began to go down in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And so we were able to catch up. Absolutely. Of course, I think you guys have to really admit that from the financial crisis, from 9/11, from COVID, we didn't recover the right way. Okay? The boom and bust cycles in housing, the quality of housing, urban planning, immigration, the service and the pricing of these hotels, the politics, local government structure, and the schools, list goes on, we don't recover properly. I think finally Las Vegas especially has to get a kick in their butt and finally realize, you know something, it's time to change things. It's time for alternatives. And I got her business card, by the way. I may interview her one day. Yeah, well, we need to recover. Nevada faces a unique challenge. You need land to build a house, and we're running out. The amount of available land has propped up land prices. Labor costs, higher land costs, and of course these home builders. See what they have to say. President of KB Homes envisions they're doing everything they can to lower costs, get into the first home. Yeah, right. You guys are not. See, and that's the thing. Nowadays, the sizes of their homes are coming down because prices are going up and these interest rates are going up. It's kind of interesting because since we started lower interest rates, from 1980 to 2022, the median home size has bellied up, and now it's reversing. Home prices sat at a record high, $485,000 start of the year. Absolutely. They've kind of remained flat since March of 2022. You got to remember that in the 1990s, we built more and more homes, but home prices were stable and far more affordable according to wages. Land availability, development costs, interest rate environment, all these things. 11,000, 1,500 permits, which is a slight dip. Okay, well, we'll see if they release federal lands is going to do anything. But in the long term, I think demand for housing is going to come down. Not only because the price of homes have gone up, which scared a lot of people away, not only immigration levels are coming down, also because of the fact that, well, we're going to talk about this. I talked about how the tourism market here in Las Vegas, last but not least, has not really recovered very, very well from COVID. Now remember, they could say that things are looking good, but according to the LVCVA, which I've been to their meetings many, many times, the Las Vegas Convention Visitors Authority, visitation has not passed 2016 levels. Now, if you guys don't know what happened in 2016, the dreaded MGM Resort started to charge for parking. And the man who's responsible for this, who's done the most damage to Las Vegas, is the former CEO, Jim Murren. And by the way, the predecessor, Baron Hornbuckle, who replaced them in February of 2020, coincidentally, he's been extended. That's a different story. But the strip numbers are down, but off the strip is a different story. Now, what does this exactly tell you? This tells you that, look, downtown Las Vegas, Boulder Highway, and Reno are seeing gains. And I'm not surprised if Laughlin is seeing gains, Station Casinos are seeing gains. Folks, you can blame all of this in the recent administration, and I'm not saying he doesn't have an impact. But the heart of the problem is the fact that these overpriced services, parking, resort fees, food, beverage. I'm going to tell you, most of the things I see on the strip is a ripoff. There's still a lot of good deals, okay? However, the problem is that it's not really worth the price. And the pricing has gone up much faster than inflation. It's pretty depressing. Of course, not as bad as Disneyland, but you get the whole idea. And I think it's going to get to the point where people are maxing out on their credit cards. Foreign tourism is not what it used to be. You can't just keep propping things up with concerts, events, and sports, because the money has to come from somewhere. You can't just keep depending on top 10%. You can't just keep depending on corporations paying their employees to come here for conventions and ranking up their credit cards. You can't just depend on that. At the end of the day, everything has its limits, and we're seeing signs of it. Honestly, I think the Vegas economy has to suffer for us to really get an awakening and seeing what's going on. And I know it's going to be painful, and I know a lot of us who work in the tourism industry and related industries, we're going to get a cut in pay, in tips, and everything. Unfortunately, this will create awakening and realizing you need to restructure. And for heaven's sakes, here's the really worst part. We haven't built a lot of hotels since the financial crisis. And I think this was done on purpose so that way we can keep things scarce, jack up prices. Because whatever happened to the Harmon project, there's all these hotels that are being proposed. The Dream Casino, the property that is owned by the Wynn West. There's all these proposals. Remember the 7-star hotel north of the Fountain? We have to see how that turns out. Of course, they're working on the Hard Rock, which replaced the Mirage. Keep that in mind. Then again, what is going to be the end goal of these projects? I like these hotels to come to shake things up. Nevertheless, I think a lot of people, either they're not going to come here, or they're probably going to go to Fremont Street. They're probably going to look at other places. They probably may take a walk along the strip, barely spend any money. They might look at a new attraction like maybe Fontainebleau or the Sphere, but they're barely going to spend any money. Okay? That's just a harsh reality. Maybe you might some good deals on an attraction or a Cirque du Soleil show, Blue Men Group, but other than that, it's really not worth it, folks. They went too far. And we're going to see how this all turns out. All right, everybody, let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much. Please stay tuned. I'll have more videos to come.